It's Thursday, March 13th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. We live in a time of shrinking and disappearing newsrooms, information overload, disinformation, fake news, AI bots. What an interesting time to pick journalism as a profession. Today on the show, I've got some journalism students and an instructor here to talk about it. And I'll say at the halfway point of today's show, you will hear from Matthew Johnson, Director of Education for Media Smarts. So Media Smarts is Canada's bilingual centre for digital media literacy. And we are going to talk about how to find out what is true or not true online. So tips for digesting news in this age of information overload and the fire hose that comes at us. But in a year of 3 elections for Newfoundland and Labrador, right, municipal, provincial, federal, also with everything going on south of the border, tariff threats and actual tariffs, it's nice to be able to get some tips on sifting through what is what. And here's where you come into today's show as we're chatting about journalism and the craft of it and what it's like now and the future of it. What news stories are you following at the moment? What's speaking to you? Is it all tariffs and politics, right? Are you feeling overloaded with that? Or are there other stories that you're following that you think are just slipping just below the radar that could deserve some attention? If you want to join the conversation with us, the lines are open, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206, The Signal at cbc.ca for emails. All right, so let me see. Who do we get? CNA instructor, among other things. Peter Walsh, how you doing?
Hello, good to be here.
Can we get this straight first? We are not related.
Not related.
But people have asked us.
Many times. I get it, you get it.
Yeah, we both get it over the years, right? So former CBCer, plus you've had a whole career like post-CBC from instructing to doing your own producing and everything else.
Right.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming in.
Oh, it's great to be here.
And who else do we have here? All right, let's give me your one-line introductions for each of you, if you could. Just say who you are and why you want to study journalism. Madeline, we'll start with you.
So my name's Madeline. I thought that it was important to study journalism because I think it's important for people to know what's going on around them, and it's important for them to get the truth and get the facts.
Excellent. All right. Mahalia, what about yourself?
My name's Mahalia, and I got interested in journalism because I wanted to be a part of writing the present history, I guess, for the future.
Excellent. Olivia Taylor.
My name is Olivia Taylor. I got into journalism because growing up I was super into public speaking, and I really wanted to, use that skill as well. I like to engage a lot with like the public and stuff like that. But yeah, so far through the program, I've discovered there's a lot more than just the speaking part as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. What's it been like teaching journalism these years?
Yeah, great question. It's become more important to me as the years have come on. When I left CBC, say 15 years ago, I expanded more into the film and television world, independent production, and that's been wonderful. But I never stopped, freelancing pieces to the CBC or NTV or wherever, and I was always making documentary television and everything. But there's no question that everything you mentioned off the top of the show has, it's who we are as journalists and storytellers. You can't help but get upset by seeing more misinformation and all of this. So as I've been teaching part-time as one of the things I've done for 15 years. And as I said, it's become more and more important to me. I think it's more important than ever. And so when this opportunity came up, actually a former CBC person, Jonathan Crow, retired.
Yeah.
And
I saw that Facebook post. Yeah,
yeah, there you go. So small community of professionals. So yes, I'm kind of fulfilling the role Jonathan did. So I've taken over his courses, and I teach television essentially at College of North Atlantic and other courses, of course. But, why did I leave a successful consulting business to do that? Multiple reasons. I don't want to overstate it all, but one of them is because it's important, because it's more important than ever that it is really a challenge to know what's true and what's not. And I just think, obviously so much changes technologically, and we should always embrace that and go with that. But fundamentally, the purpose of journalism, to tell the truth, to hold power to account, to do the legwork to figure out what's not a rumor and what's truth, and just the basics of what is journalism, that hasn't changed. And it's arguably more important than ever when we have so much of a threat to democracy happening. So I don't try to overstate what we're doing. I've said to these students and the others that, I don't overstate your role in it all, but every time you tell a story, every time you do your job as a journalist, you are supporting democracy. You're exercising your rights of free speech. And the fact that you're double-checking some facts and you care about putting out accurate information, that's really important. And that'll never change.
Before we go back to the students, I'm going to ask you to think back to your CBC career. What's a memory of yours when you're like, wow, like either I'm a journalist doing the work of it, or a story that you're like, gosh, that really I'm so glad and happy or proud that I was involved with that story.
Oh, wow. Well, a couple come to mind. The day Danny Williams came down and held a news conference announcing that Newfoundland was no longer a have province or have not province, that it was a have province. That was important. Also, it was around that time, the big fight with Ottawa of the
hauling down flags and stuff.
Hauling down flags. I was the reporter who asked him the question that prompted the hauling down of the flags. Now, it was a stage. It was going to happen no matter who asked it. But it was just to be there, to be at the front row of all of that. I threw the question. I said, sounds like you're talking about separating from Canada, are you? And he was like waiting for that question. Yeah. And so he did the big thing. There was that. But also, I think one of the big kicks is doing work that can change policy and can help people. You don't set out with a specific agenda to change anything, but you definitely want to highlight problems and issues and then hope that other people do their jobs and pick up the baton and fix the issue. And that does happen. And it can be instantly gratifying as a journalist to break a story or tell a story and then immediately people do the right thing. Cast
light on it, identify gaps, holes, and then changes happen because of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it can be and I still see that as much as the journalism has been weakened and there are issues and all that stuff, there is still the local media and certainly the national, international media, they still have the ability to shine a light on a problem, and hopefully that can change things for the better.
So for the rest of you here, when it comes to following news, how do you follow news nowadays? Because for me, I get up, listen to the morning show. I read like the New York Times. I go to CBC. I check VOCM. I'll tune into NTV every so. I try to have a diet of local, provincially, national, and still to have an international understanding. Right? I do not get my news off of TikTok. No shade for folks who do, depending on who you're following there. But I'm just curious about what your news diets or your media and social media diets are like. Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Sure.
So I grew up, my house always has the news on kind of thing, on the radio. We always have it going. So I'm listening to that. That's more so local. Also, I try and watch the news in the evenings with my nan. She always has it on. So if I'm over there, I'm watching it as well. I mean, now you're getting notifications on your phone about certain news that's happening, and you can customize that depending on what you want. So I get some of those as well. It's hard to avoid if you're on TikTok. There is stuff coming up, but I think it's important if you're looking at the news on TikTok, check and see if that's legit, because a lot of it's not. So there is, I wouldn't say I get my news consistently off there, but sometimes stuff does come up and it's legitimate news, but it's important to check.
Oh, look, it's staying with me 2 weeks later on Instagram, right? So it goes on TikTok first, then I get it a couple weeks later. I'm like, is this a thing or is it not? And then, I check it. All right, next.
Yeah, so growing up, my dad was a really big fan of CBC Radio too, so that was always on in the car and whenever we were driving around. So that was mainly where I heard most of my news growing up. Personally, it's only been in the more recent years where I've been more interested in looking into the news myself. So I listen to the World Report every morning. If I don't have as much time, I'll put on the World this hour. A lot of it is international. For local, I just kind of look up VOCM, whatever else we have, and that's mainly where my consumption comes from, the news.
Cool. All right, Madeline, what about yourself?
A lot of where I get my news is just online or through like a news organization's app. Like I have the CBC app on my phone, and I'll
Good.
and I'll check that and look into that. So I do get a lot of notifications for that. Besides that, it's also kind of just talk at the supper table at home, really, just with my family of what's going on and what they heard that day.
So then, in your social networks, right, with your friends and folks around you, what's the media literacy rates or conversation rates like with your friends about what's going on, right? We're in a time of tariff threats and tariffs, and there's elections and crisis in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine. Like, there's a lot happening. Are you having those conversations with your friends, or is it just stuff you're taking in yourselves?
Yeah, for me, it really depends on who I'm talking to, what friends. Some really aren't interested in the news, which is unfortunate. I have a Ukrainian friend, so I talk a lot to her about what's happening in Ukraine and also what's happening in Ukraine between the U.S. But I find that a lot of the people I do talk to talk a lot more about American politics than actually in Canada. You know, I'm always hearing about the tariffs and Donald Trump and stuff when I'm talking to my friends, if we're talking about news usually, which is surprising.
I took a taxi we were yesterday at the Geo Center for the show, right? And so I took a taxi back here, and that was the first thing the taxi driver said to me, right? He was like, oh, talking about Donald Trump, the American president, U.S. president, and tariffs. First thing that came up. And in the past, it wouldn't always be that, right? There'd be other things that we would talk about, but that was the first. All right, anyone else?
Yeah, well, with my friends, I mean, I feel like it's not a major topic. We don't often talk about the news, but they're all pretty well versed. I just know from other people I talk to, a lot of them get their information from TikTok or from Instagram, and that just needs a lot of cross-examination to find out if that's actually legit. But I mean, yeah, once again, people mainly know more about American politics that I've noticed than Canadian politics.
Because I find myself looking, so I'll be on like Facebook, right? So the Florida of the internet, it skews older, and I see posts from people in my orbit sometimes, and I'm just kind of like, sometimes I know it's not factual, right? And I'm not the internet police. I'm not emailing everyone all the time, but I just see it go by. I'm like, oh, that's an unfortunate post. Oh, that's unfortunate. That should have been kind of double checked, right? And those are folks my age or older, right? 45 and older. So when you're talking to folks, if friends or people that you run into, if they're talking about stuff off of TikTok that is questionable, what's that like for you as someone who cares about media and news?
Well, I mean, I try not to push them too much to say you should really like look at this in a different sense, have a different point of view. But I might suggest I mean, with my people I know, I'll ask okay, how do you know that? Or like, where'd you get that information? Just like to try to push them to think maybe I need to double check where I got this information to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mahalia. Well, Madeline, what about yourself?
So some of my friends do pay attention to news and politics and such. Others don't. Now with my partner, he was really interested in what was going on over in the U.S., especially with the election. Now some of my friends, they will see stuff on TikTok and we'll talk about it. Usually when they bring it up, I'll go and kind of double check it somewhere else and look at an online source that I do trust, and then we'll kind of just dissect it from there.
Cool. Peter, you got some pretty responsible students here, man.
No, they're all right. Hey, that's good. All is not lost.
How has your media consumption changed over the years?
Yeah, it has changed for sure. So I've watched somewhat in horror as Facebook, for example, it's gotten to the point where you would say, I don't know if that's true or not, probably is, to a place now where even something that looks and smells like it's true and real, you have no idea if it is, because anybody can create a very professional looking post, and and they're just all point of views. Everything's an advocate point of view. There's very little like, here's some news I found out. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, no, I don't. I'm at a point now with social media. I literally do not believe it. And I guess, is it old school? I don't know. But I still trust legacy media. I still, and interesting to hear the students say the same thing. They will find something interesting and then you refer back maybe trace the source or whatever. But yeah, I'm more inclined to trust the CBC and the New York Times and the Toronto Star and NTV and VOCM. I'll trust them far more than some person who's trying to get clicks and create their
and that's
own
the thing.
vibe, right?
We're in a world of influencers. Who are trying to profit off of
Clicks.
clicks, and because of disasters the world over. Right. So you got that, and then on Facebook, whether it's your memes or whatever, a lot of it, depending on how you're wired, can feel true.
Yeah.
And that's some of the issue that I see, because they get you in the fields. The next thing you're hitting share.
Yeah.
And no, that wasn't true.
No.
Right.
And it's not news. It's emotion.
Yeah.
It's point of view, emotional stuff. And yeah, it's that whole echo chamber thing. And I've seen that. I've been teaching for 15, 16 years. And I have seen students, I have watched it deteriorate. Media literacy has deteriorated. There is definitely students, when we get interesting discussions going in the class, you hear these conspiracy theories come in. And you're like, wow, you really believe that? Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I have to deal with that. And just a kind of a mushing and a weakening of the understanding of what democracy is and the role of the free press, some people, now it's becoming more evident than ever, but like they don't see a difference between China, Russia, United States, and the Western democracies and things like that. They just say, it's all, I don't know what to believe. I don't believe anything. And that's discouraging for me to see. I don't like seeing that.
Can I ask you, and then I'll ask the other guests here, when you talk to students about the industry now and the future, because there's a couple of different ways I look at it. I think, as you said in the beginning, it is such an important time for journalism, for journalists, and in a weird way, maybe weird's not the word, but even it is a crucial yet also really, really interesting time to be in it, with everything going on and with all the stakes at play. What a time. But shrinking, disappearing newsrooms around the world. So you have both of those things happening. How do you communicate that or talk about it in class?
I'm pretty upbeat about that, honestly, because I do believe that there's always going to be a market for the truth and information. People are we're built to tell each other stories, and we're built to care about our communities. And so there's always going to be a need for journalism. And where it gets tricky and where I can help the students less is, what exactly should you be doing? What technology should you exactly be embracing? And where should you exactly go for a job? That's hard to do. I still think, the legacy media locally and nationally are still important, and they still have jobs. So yes, legacy media is good. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with, we teach courses on freelance and independence. If you want to be an influencer, go for it.
Oh, sure.
Go for it. I hope you're a truth-telling influencer, and you take the skills from our training to do it responsibly. But yeah, my philosophy is embrace technological change a lot. Do not, what I mean? Multi-skilling, hard work, and learn the buttons, but never give up on the truth, the importance of truth.
Yeah. And day one, your Substack may not pay the bills, but it might down the road, depending on who you are and the work you put into it, right? Really, though, because there are folks out there doing it, even though it is really hard. And then you've got publications like the Independent, who's got some real great folks working for it. All right, so thoughts on, for yourselves, thoughts on the future of trying to get into this industry as you study with the stuff me and Peter are talking about.
I mean, so the newsrooms I've heard are shrinking.
Yeah.
I obviously am not in the field yet, so I haven't seen that firsthand. So I guess I remain hopeful, I'll get a job. It'll be great.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it will be. But I think it's definitely worth giving it a bit of thought. Okay, where do I want to work if there's not exactly going to be a physical place in a newsroom that I have, basically.
All right, Olivia, what about yourself?
Yeah, pretty similar to that, honestly. Coming into the program, I think you kind of have to have an open mind. You can't just be doing it I just want to be on TV. I just want to be on TV. There's a lot more options that you can do, and that's not to say that you can't be on TV, but I think, you have to have an open mind and be willing to adapt to the changing times.
Madeline.
Coming into the program, you will get people who will make comments, that it is a dying business, but I don't think that changes how important it is. And I think at the end of the day, it's just important to do what you think is right and what you like to do. So I decided to just give a chance on journalism.
Oh yeah, look, if I'm fairly certain, me being me, to do it all over again at this time would not make a different decision. I'm 100% with you on that. We've got Matthew Johnson on the line. So I made this promise at the start of the show, right? Matthew is the Director of Education for Media Smarts. So Media Smarts is Canada's bilingual centre for digital media literacy, registered charity. It's been conducting research, developing resources, and advancing digital media literacy since 1996, like way back. Matthew Johnson, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
All right, we're talking. We've got some journalism students here, an instructor. We're talking all about news, really, right? Like getting into the industry, the fire hose of information these days. I also mentioned the fact that in Newfoundland and Labrador, there are local elections at the municipal level. There's a provincial one, and also we're just waiting to hear about that federal one. What are folks facing these days when it comes to overload and digital media to try to sift through?
Well, it's so much more difficult than it was a generation ago to know whether or not what you're engaging with, what you're seeing, is even basically reliable, because it is so easy to share content online. It's so easy to share things out of context. It's so easy to manipulate, or nowadays even completely generate false images, false text, false audio. So we really have a whole job to do as citizens that we didn't have to do a generation ago, and that is really basic fact-checking of things that seem related to news that come to us rather than us going to news sources to seek them out.
So what do we do?
Well, really what it is about is it's about finding out whether or not a source is reliable enough to be worth your critical attention. So we teach 4 quick steps in our Break the Fake program, which really is designed to be usable by anybody from teens up to however old you want to be. And it's 4 quick things. So the first is knowing that there are resources out there, fact-checking tools. Snopes is the most famous example, but there are lots of different ones that focus on different things, that operate in different countries and different languages, that in many cases will have already verified or debunked something before you see it. And we've actually made a custom search engine that searches more than 20 of those all at once. So you can find that at our website and use that really quickly. If something hasn't been fact-checked already, the first thing you want to do is find out where it originally came from, because most of us have an experience now, as I said, where news is coming to us via social media or other things, and so it's important to track a story or a claim back to its original source rather than deciding whether or not to believe it based on the person who actually shared it with us. When you get to that original source, if it's not one you already know is basically reliable, do a little work to verify it. Don't look at what they say about themselves. Check to see if Wikipedia or a Google search tells you that they are considered to be a basically reliable source. And the last thing that you can do, of course, is turn the internet to your advantage. Check other sources that you already know are reliable. So if it's a news story, do a search, use the news tab on a search engine like Google instead of the main search. That restricts the results to real news outlets that actually exist, and that'll give you a sense of whether or not this news story is actually happening and whether the version of it that you saw is giving you the whole story.
How long have you been doing this job for anyways, Matthew?
Well, I've been doing it for 16 years now.
16 years. What are your thoughts on where we are? And because like all of a sudden AI is part of the conversation, which it was not 16 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But, there's not too much that AI can do that can't be done with other technologies. It just makes it easier. But, a few years ago, what we were dealing with was photos where people were holding signs or wearing T-shirts, and the text on the sign of the T-shirt had been changed.
Yes.
That's easy to do with really basic photo editing. But people would believe it if they wanted to believe it. And so the critical thinking skills, being in the habit of not believing something right when you see it, being extra cautious of things that you want to believe, and verifying, they're really the same in the AI world as they were before. Because with an AI photo, for instance, AI image generators have gotten good enough. You can't count on there being extra thumbs or anything like that. But an AI photo or an AI video is not going to have provenance. When you try to track it back to its original source, it's not going to be coming from a real news organization or a wire service or someone else. It's going to be essentially coming out of nowhere or from just some source that maybe is open, that they just made it on AI, like that famous photo of the Pope in the puffer coat. That was made by someone. That was made by someone who was trying to demonstrate that AI could make convincing images of real people now, and he was open about what he was doing, but it almost immediately got shared out of context. But if you tracked it down, if you had followed that second step I was describing about finding the source, you would have realized what the actual context was, and it wasn't ever supposed to be taken as a real photo.
Before I let you go, what's your media diet like?
For work, I spend a lot of time on Blue Sky because that's where most of the people who do work in my field share research. I read a whole lot of news every morning. I read about 20 different news sources every morning to compile our Media Smarts News Digest. I do appointment streaming every night for about an hour and a half or 2 hours between when the kids go to bed and when I go to bed.
Wow. Amazing. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your expertise.
Thanks for having me.
All right, cheers.
Bye.
Matthew Johnson there, Director of Education for Media Smarts. And folks, so for that bit he was talking about there about break the fake, just look up Media Smarts with your Google button and you can get all that information, especially in this world we're in right now. Any thoughts about what Matthew Johnson was saying, folks?
I just would pick up on the AI thing and how I think it reiterated, he kind of backed up the point that I was trying to make earlier, which is that you cannot believe what you see anymore, right? And it's getting better and better and better, and it's now voices and it's now video. So
once they figure out the fingers thing, we're,
it's done. Like, we're there now.
Yeah.
People need to realize now you cannot believe what you see. That's terrible.
If you see a video that pulls at your heartstrings and you don't know where it's from, you got to question it.
You do. You just have to do this. So one of the things I also tell students and people is that there's a little bit more onus on you. And a part of me gets a little depressed when Matthew's saying, here are the 4 things you have to do and do this and this and this.
People aren't going to do it.
They're not going to do it. And the whole purpose of journalism is to do the work for people. They're busy. They might get a half an hour or 20 minutes to digest the news, and you've done the legwork all day, and that's what you're getting paid to do.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So now we're asking people to do more work. So that is discouraging. But if there is a responsibility as a citizen to know the truth. So, I say to people, buy a subscription, double check your facts. You got to do something. Yeah. You cannot just scroll endlessly and believe everything you see.
And
that's just not a smart thing.
If you're scrolling, and scrolling leads to sharing.
Yeah.
And sharing leads to folks talking about stuff that is factually either inaccurate or just completely untrue. You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Just there, no relation, Peter Walsh, the CNA instructor who's with me. We're talking about journalism. We've got journalism students here, Olivia Taylor, Mahalia, Ardis, and Madeline Westcott here today. As you're listening to the show, The Signal at cbc.ca if you want to get in touch with us, or you can join the conversation. The question for you today, what news stories are you following at the moment? Is it all tariffs and politics? Are there other stories you're tracking? Get in touch with us. Also, thoughts on mis and disinformation. The numbers to call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. The text line, 709-327-8206. Anyone else with any thoughts on what Matthew Johnson was having to say here?
Yeah, I just think I do agree with a lot of you saying you need to know where you're getting your information.
Yeah.
So if you see something, know if it's a reliable source, track back to find where it originally came from, and then from there, make your decision, I guess, whether you're going to believe it or not. Like the Pope and the puffer jacket, I only saw that once, and I did not know it was on purpose.
Yeah, I remember seeing it being like, huh? And then I was like, that's interesting. What is this? And then I saw like the whole cycle of it being shared, and then the stories on, hey, that's AI. It was for a point, and just kind of watching all that in real time. It was quite something to see. Also, hey, stylish jacket.
It's a nice jacket.
Looked pretty good. All right, anyone else?
I do agree with what he was saying. Now, when I was younger, if I seen something interesting on Facebook or wherever, I remember going home and telling my parents about it, and immediately my parents would ask, okay, where did you see that? And then if it was Facebook, they were like, okay, well, I think you need to do a little more research into that. And I agree with that now, especially being older and going through the journalism program a little bit. It's really important to just check your sources.
All right, Olivia, what about yourself?
Yeah, I've definitely been a victim of falling for something that's fake on social media, for sure. And, you have to take a closer look at a lot of stuff. But I think, especially now since I've started the journalism program, I catch myself a lot more frequently, like thinking critically. And it's just essential because there's so much circulating that is fake. And unfortunately, not everyone double checks, and not everyone just takes a step back and realizes that it's fake, and it's too bad that it's shared.
What news stories are speaking to you nowadays? What are you following? And there's no right or wrong answer on that. There's no pressure around it, but I'm just curious what you're either reading, listening to, or thinking about when it comes to news and current events.
Given everything that's happening right now, it's all a lot of politics based.
Yeah.
So I've heard a lot of U.S. politics, a lot of, Canadian politics, because we just got Mark Carney in the office. Yeah. And so right now it's a lot of politics. However, we kind of try to focus on local when we're writing our own stories. I believe that's one of the things that our instructors prefer us to do. So that's when it makes us look around a bit more, like what's happening locally, do a bit of research, and find a story on what's happening here.
So what's some of the local stuff you've been looking at?
Oh God, now I'm blanking.
That's okay. No.
There was a rock climbing. I did a rock climbing story a little while ago about Walnuts and Cove Bouldering Cafe, which are the two rock climbing buildings environments in St. John's, and that was just like the comparison between them both and how they're working together, because they are different types of climbing. So that's one local story, I guess.
Cool, nice. All right, who else?
A lot of stuff that I've been seeing lately is what's going on in the U.S. Mainly, it's a lot of Trump, to be honest. A lot of it is Trump. And a lot about the tariffs as well. That's been all over the news lately. Usually when I get a notification on my phone and I check it, it's something about either Trump or the tariffs.
What do you enjoy following? Or do you enjoy, because there's the what's occupying all of the brain space because of the news run, and then there's the but here's what I really enjoy reading about. Or is it that?
I do enjoy politics. I don't think it would be the first thing that I would look at when I go online, though. I do really enjoy reading about just current affairs and like court reporting. I find really interesting.
Cool.
And some sports and entertainment in there as well, for sure.
Yeah. All right. What about yourself?
Yeah, like my other classmates, definitely politics is pretty dominating in my news consumption. I think I get a notification on my phone every day, something to do with Trump. If I was to choose something to follow, I like to look into the the agriculture industry, and as well I do like the arts and stuff like that. So that's something that I would probably enjoy more to click on. But if I'm just throwing on the news at home, it's usually something to do with politics right now.
Same, right? It's for me in this seat here, I find it's been a lot around thinking about tariffs, tariff threats, what the reality could be, what it could mean to folks in Newfoundland and Labrador and across the country. So it's the U.S. political situation. Then we had Andrew Furey announced she was stepping down. Now we're looking at the new, both contenders for the premiership. Plus, there's the new prime minister being sworn in tomorrow. So it's all of that, and then I still like to keep tabs on some international news, right? Like keeping up with the crisis in the Middle East, what's happening with the war in Ukraine, and I spent a lot of time in the Asia Pacific region, and I'm still trying at some point to keep in touch with what's happening there, as hard as all of that is, because there's only so much time in the run of a day. Peter, what are you? What's speaking to you lately?
Well, what's jumping out at me too is you and Matthew and all of us, we do something that our jobs require us to. I call it reading in the morning. You do this big read in.
Yeah.
And so we can't expect everybody to do that
at all.
But what I could advise people to do is develop a bit of a routine. Maybe it's not 20 media sources like Matthew does.
Yeah,
that's
that was a lot.
But don't just do the same one. One of the things, I think it's important to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, change it up a little bit. Try, for me, as much as it can be frustrating, I do read Fox News. I want to know what they're talking about. I want to see what just their perspective. And it can at times be revealing that it's not always completely at 180 degrees, and it's important to understand somebody else's point of view. And whenever I have a chance to read something that's not a typical media source for me, I enjoy that. I do that. So I think for people who want to break through the misinformation is don't believe everything you see. Go to the source and find 2 or 3 things that you trust and read those, and every now and then take a flyer on something else and try to get out of your bubble.
Yeah, and also when it comes to the ones you trust, still think critically on it, right? Ask questions, right? You can be like, well, how is this story framed, right? Who are the voices here? Because
Well, can I give you one example that
sure,
I think
go for it.
that dovetails of everything we're talking about? It's about the tariffs and everything, and this idea that if we have this fentanyl coming in from Canada, and the Americans are saying, well, the reason we're doing all this is because we got to secure our borders, and then Canadians are saying, well, there's only less than 1% fentanyl. But that government line from the States that it's about security at the border and fentanyl, like the Prime Minister is saying it, the Deputy Prime Minister, they're all saying that's not true, that's not true, that's not what we're saying. But that line is persistently still there in CNN reports and other American media. This is the benefit of multiple sources, and to your point, even be critical of the organizations we trust. Just because it's on the CBC or CNN doesn't mean it's definitely true. So the more you read and think about these things, you can spot this. But that's one that's driving me crazy now. Is this idea that it's about fentanyl, and that's the scary part, is that their main reason for this is actually not true. So what is it they want? Well, Prime Minister's telling us he wants to take over our country. Like what? It's a crazy time. It's a lot to sift through, but it's kind of, if you care, you should engage and do your best to try to get through it all.
I spent a lot of time. So we earlier in the show, and you mentioned journalism, truth to power, right? That democracy, the act of democracy. So there's that side of it. I also spent a lot of time of thinking about empathy, and the folks who are not the truth to power fighting, trying to help preserve democracy, but the folks who are being impacted by things. And those stories we do, those stories that you connect with someone who's not someone in a position of power, but it's someone who, whether it's a gap in the system or it's something that's happened to their family or themselves or that kind of it, and that kind of a thing, and the importance of people hearing about that to try to understand whether it's what communities are experiencing, to hopefully have some empathy from community to community, household to household, person to person. When it comes to your teaching, what's the conversation like with students around the range of journalism for different stories that are out there? Because we heard also great local reporting of rock climbing too, which is like that information is important.
They're students, right? Yeah. They're just learning. So we encourage, local rather than taking on Ukraine and Middle East. And they're just starting. How are they
just getting in? Yeah.
The Prime Minister's not going to return their call yet.
Exactly.
So cover events, cover local. I always say it scales up pretty easily. The act of putting together a local story, the audiences get bigger and the job titles get more impressive, but you're still just talking to people and telling stories and getting it right and double checking stuff. And and there's nothing, and it's great. I mean, people primarily care about local news a lot anyway. Yeah. So The local news has been over the decades, over the longer sweep of time, has been decimated. So I'll put a plug in for kicker.ca,
Yes.
kicker.ca, kicker.cnn.ca. That's our local show and our media platform, and we have a lot of different multimedia sources, and all our stories get put up there. It's another source of local news for you. You know what I mean? And it won't be for everybody, but there's always something for somebody there.
So what other local stories are we all working on here or thinking
You trying to
about?
steal our stories?
Right? I need some show ideas. Peter.
That's what's happening
5 shows
here.
a week.
Listen, be very careful when you answer with this guy.
Be very careful. What else are we thinking about, or what have we worked on?
Last semester, there was one that I worked on. It was for an assignment for Peter, actually. It didn't get posted anywhere, but it was important. It was about the food bank in CBS, the CBS Paradise Community Food Bank, and just the increase that they've seen of food insecurity in the province. And I think that's a really important thing for people to know about, is how the increase is affecting everybody and how bad the food insecurity is getting.
So what conversations did you have with folks around it?
I spoke to Faye Da, so she works at the food bank there, and it was just going over some of the numbers with her. She told me that they used to do, when she first started out, she used to do about, I think it was close to like 130 hampers a month, and now that's increased to upwards of 400 a month that they're doing. So she's seen a really big increase.
When you heard that, what did you think?
It was just one of those moments where you kind of just you don't know how to react. You don't know what to say, and you kind of just, it's just wow, and you just gotta soak that in and really think about it.
Yeah, and it's one of those details that then if you go to other food banks, you're going to hear similar stuff, obviously, and it speaks so much at this point in time with the economy, the cost of living crisis we're going through, and the layers to that story go from hyper-local to the CBS Food Bank to provincially to nationally and around the world. Right? It's the building stuff that Peter's talking about, which is, it's such an important story to dig into. All right, that's one. Anything else?
I find there's so many communities and groups around St. John's that want to tell their story, that want to have their voices heard. So that's a good local place to look. I mean, Maddie did a great story a while ago on Velvet closing. Like, that was an interesting one. And I did a story, it didn't get published, but it was for Peter, for my assignment at the end of last semester, about a comedy show that's really LGBTQ plus forward. And it creates a space for women in comedy and non-binary people in comedy who may not have a position in an area where it's a primarily male-dominated field.
I just wonder, when you say not get published, we put it on Kicker.
Yes.
I think you mean we publish it on Kicker.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, when they say not published, I think you mean not picked up by the other media and all that. And that's
No, because it was the assignment we did.
Right.
That wasn't. It was our very first assignment at the end of the semester. So it's just was for the assignment.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It was in coursework,
It was in
not for
coursework.
Kicker.
So,
Understood. Well, it should be on Kicker. Well, let's get it on Kicker.
That's a great story. Yeah. And that's that empathy bit I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like people realizing the need for safe spaces and what that can provide, and then how that can uplift a community with comedy, and for folks to go and see it. Great story.
Yeah.
I love it. Anything else?
Yeah, I've had the chance to cover some pretty different stuff within the local region, and it's pretty cool because we can pitch it. We pitch our stories every Thursday. We can pitch 2 stories, so you kind of have a little bit of leeway there, where depending on what you want to do. I've done some interesting ones. I did one about the impact of the tax break on restaurants, and I had a consumer's point of view and a few restaurants' point of view, which was pretty interesting. And as well, I did one on the no phone policy in school. St. Kevin's in the Ghouls was doing that since September. They started off on their own to kind of do a pilot program. So halfway through, I think it was in January, I went in and I'd just seen how it was going, which was cool too.
What'd you learn about it?
The pilot program, so far it seems to be going good. I interviewed a parent and a student and a teacher, and that was all positive. But the student did mention there's some mixed opinions going around among the students, kind of thing. But I'm trying to think now. I think there was so far an increase in grades. They didn't give me an exact number, and this was a little while ago, but I think it is already showing some impact halfway through, so I might even be able to go interview again towards the end.
That's great work. Go ahead.
I just want to jump in about to your question earlier. You might find it interesting that our enrollment is up this year over last year.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and anecdotally, one of my colleagues was speaking to one of their colleagues in Nova Scotia, and their understanding is in journalism schools around Atlantic Canada, some enrollment is trending up. Wow. So that's encouraging that this generation pardon me. Oh, could easily.
Got a cough button.
Use the cough button. There it is in action.
Students, that is the proper use of the cough button.
But that's encouraging to me that, hearing that they're still gathering their news the way you and I did, mom and dad listening on the radio, watching the TV, talking at the supper table, still interested in telling stories and caring about their communities and still want to go to journalism school because they think it's a good job. And that's awesome to hear, and it motivates me, and it's nice to know that enrollment is ticking, anecdotally, in Atlantic Canada, ticking upward.
Well, in the cross-section of these stories, any given day, that could be the run for CBC News. Right? Like that's the rundown. Food banks, LGBTQ plus forward comedy, safe space comedy. You're getting schools and cell phones, and also talking to the restaurant industry about essentially the economy and the break. That's a news run right there, and you're doing it all with and say the website again for the kicker.
Kicker.ca.
Kicker.ca.
Kicker News.
Kicker News. Right?
Kickernews.ca.
So then, in a time of online digital media, podcasting, there's documentaries still being made. There's obviously still the supper hour news and how things are evolving around, but like with news streaming and everything else. Where do you folks hope to land? What do you want to be doing?
I was surprised to find how much I appreciate the photography aspect of journalism, but also broadcast news, like reading the news. I did a few of those coursework assignments in the first semester, and I thought that was pretty fun, just being like the person reading the news on the radio.
All right, cool. What about yourself?
Broadcast for me would be my goal, but I think after going into the program and learning about the different routes that I can take, I think I could end up somewhere completely different. But yeah, broadcast.
Any part of it really would be interesting to land in. I don't think there's one aspect of it that I'm currently focused on, like that's exactly what I want to do when I'm done the program. I think any section of it really would just be a really good opportunity to learn something new and gain more experience. And it was really interesting coming into the program and realizing how much I liked the audio and broadcast aspect of it as well. I wasn't expecting to like that as much as I did. So that was nice to get to know that side of it as well.
Oh, I started it's a different route, but I started with print in South Korea because I went over to teach English, and then I started working for this little English magazine and then an English newspaper, came back here, got in with VOCM for a bit, and then I still remember the first, so I'd been on television once, and it was not live, and this story came at the time of there were no zeros anymore in schools, so I broke this story, and then my boss, Peter Gullidge, was like, hey, the network wants you this afternoon, and Peter, you know all about this, right? The network wants you for 3 hits. And then all of a sudden he was waving his hand in front of my face. He's like, are you still there? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, it looks like you disappeared for a second. I still remember the feeling of just terror that I had. It was going to be on national media for the afternoon. But it's the start. And you end up, not knowing that you're going to appreciate something necessarily. And then I worked in radio for the last,
Well, if I can plug the program and plug the profession, it's fun. It's fun. It's important, and of course it's important, and the stories for the people matter the most. But for yourself as a career, it's dynamic, it's interesting, there's opportunity, and it's fun. It's just fun to tell stories.
You're there for history as it happens. Can you tell the story about the Queen?
I can briefly tell a story about the Queen. You want me to tell that story?
Yes, tell the story.
This is one of my classic stories. You asked at the beginning of the show, what stories come to mind. And remember, one of my most memorable stories ever was 1997. I was working for the CBC, and it was remember the Matthew, the replica ship, the Matthew came over, and the Queen herself visited, and this was a big, big event. So the CBC was what's called the host broadcast broadcaster or the pool broadcaster, we provided footage to the world's media, and the world's media did care. They were from all over the place. So my assignment on the day was one of the top ones. Myself and cameraman Eddie Kennedy, we were following the Queen of England for the day. And there was lots of protocols we had to follow, and she went here and said things, and she did this and she did that. But one of the things that she did was she met an elderly woman who was living in a little bed-sitting room in Bonavista. And this woman had, over the course of her lifetime, written the Queen, I think 3 times for sure, maybe 4, but she definitely penned, like, congratulations on taking the crown when she was 25 years old, the Queen was. And the Queen eventually got around to writing her a handwritten note. So over the course of this woman's lifetime, she had received 3 handwritten notes from the Queen. And somebody in Buckingham Palace had this very good idea and put this together and said, you know, Your Majesty, you should meet this woman. She's still alive in Bonavista. Huh. Lovely, right? Yeah. So it was just a 3 or 4 minute stop throughout her day. And because it was just a bed-sitting room, and they wanted to capture it, I wasn't with a scrum and a pool and 200 yards back. They kind of shuffled us over and said, yeah, you can come in. So myself and Eddie, I had to witness, he had to film, and it was 5 people in a bed-sitting room smaller than the studio. So it was one person from Buckingham Palace, myself and Eddie, the woman who lived there, and the Queen of England. Yeah. 5 of us. And she was closer to me than I am to you now. And I remember deliberately getting out of her line of sight, like out of her peripheral vision, and literally just staring at her. I could not keep my eyes off her. It's like, that is the Queen of England. And it's just like, I could see the makeup on her face and the lines in her eyes. It was like those cheeks. I was like, that's the cheeks on the money. I've watched my entire life. And I just had this, I was within arm's length of her. And she didn't speak to us. She didn't do anything. It only lasted a couple of minutes. And she literally kind of walked by and I actually had to get out of her way so that she could come by. And I didn't know. I just looked at her. She didn't look at me. It's fine. I didn't have to do anything. And she left. And to this day, I remember, I tell that story as front row. It was just a remarkable thing to witness, to be that close to somebody who was so famous. And the other one, too, was the day that same year was a big year. The Hibernia platform was towed out. I covered that story. Like, I did the story of Hibernia dropping anchor out there. And so the beginning of the oil industry, and look how important oil has become. So, yeah. You know, not the Dan Rather or anything, but definitely I've been there on many important historical moments for Canada and certainly for Newfoundland and Labrador. Wouldn't change it for the world. Great experiences. And you get a little window. They're not your friends. The Premier's not your friend. The Queen's not my friend. But when you're there and you see them before and after and you watch them interact with people and what they're like, you get a greater sense of what they're like than just seeing a clip on the news. There's no doubt. Yeah, it's a pretty big privilege to get to do that stuff, right? It's to be there as history happens, and then to try to help communicate that with everyone else, and then for everything else we've talked about in this hour. To wrap up, just final thoughts. Anything on it? Where do you look for inspiration for journalism? Who wants to go first?
That's a good question. Did you have an answer?
I think I just kind of look for what people would care about. If I see something and I think that other people should know about it, or that it's important, or just that I think the community would really care about the topic, then I think that's something that I would pitch to my instructors and see if I could follow through with it.
All right, Madeline, Westcott, thank you. Mahalia, Ardis, your final thoughts on this for inspiration?
Yes, pretty similar to Madeline. I guess I get inspiration from more local communities, smaller communities that I feel like don't get a lot of say in the media. So that's where my interest towards journalism goes, and my inspiration for what stories I want to do.
All right, Olivia Taylor.
Yeah, whenever I'm talking to someone, I try and see if there's what they think, like, maybe could be a good news story, or what's happening, what they think is important. So I think for me, just getting around and talking to people.
Peter Walsh, 15 seconds. Final thought. You got some great students here, by the way.
Yeah, I was thinking. A+ to everybody. The future's bright. It's all good. It's nice to hear that the passion is there and that they care about what they're doing.
All right. Thank you for this. I really, really enjoyed this conversation today. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that is it for today's show. If you have thoughts for us, the signal at cbc.ca. You can call the signal line, 709-576-5260, to leave a message. Coming up tomorrow on the show, 60 years of land and sea. Jane Adey and Dave Quinton will be my guests. The lines will be open for you to chat about what the show has meant to you over the years, and they're gonna tell us a couple of stories, and it's going to be fantastic. Cheers.